And so if you would begin by introducing yourself, a brief bio, and why you're running for re-election.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me today. It's great to be here. I'm Courtney Neron, and I am running for re-election in House District 26. As a teacher and a mother, I'm really interested in continuing to focus on the future and rebuilding, especially after so many challenges of 2020. I represent currently in House District 26, which runs from Wilsonville to Hillsborough on the urban growth boundary line. So it includes Wilsonville, Sherwood, King City, parts of Tigard, Tualatin, Beaverton, Aloha, Shoals, Newburgh, and then South Hillsborough. And I'm running because I really believe that we have a responsibility to continue addressing systemic inequities and community needs, both compassionately and with foresight. So I want to make sure that we have leaders in place that can do that. And it was an honor to be chosen by the voters in 2018. I've learned so much. It's been incredibly meaningful work, and I do hope to continue building upon the knowledge that I've gained in the first 2 years and continue serving the communities that I've gotten to know in even greater depth in the last few years, and really put to use this knowledge and ideally, move the dial for so many Oregonians who are still living paycheck to paycheck, experiencing a lot of vulnerabilities right now, and I want to make sure that they have an advocate there. So stepping up again and hoping that that I can continue to bring people together in a swing district, in a moderate district where we do have people of all different political persuasions, and I want to make sure that they have somebody that's a listener too. So I do feel like I pride myself on listening and being connected to the conversations in the community, and making sure that I understand lots of different viewpoints so that I can represent well in this role.
Do you have a priority for the next term if you're reelected? What piece of legislation do you hope to offer?
There's no one piece of legislation that that I personally hope to offer. I hope to continue working with my colleagues. I do feel that we have an obligation to continue the work addressing climate change that we began in 2019, tried to address again in 2020, and that the executive order from the governor has now supported. But we still have a long ways to go in making sure that we have effective, aggressive, and immediate action that will really move the dial for reducing our carbon emissions and our reliance on fossil fuels as we head into the future, which we know will be clean energy jobs, that we need to make sure that we're making appropriate investments in the education, the infrastructure, and at the same time pair up with the governor's executive orders. So I'll be working with other colleagues that also have that emphasis and share that passion. Beyond that, there are many constituent bills that we're working on. I definitely, as I said, want to make sure my constituents feel represented. So we're working with various groups and individuals throughout the community. I myself am personally focused on making sure that we have investments in education. Really proud that we did the Student Success Act in 2019 to fund at a higher rate the preschool to 12th grade, the earlier years. But I do feel like we need to make sure we put the roof on the house, is how I say it. We built the foundation, we built the walls, but we have to make sure people have that final touch of getting themselves the whole picture to their living wage jobs, careers that they've been focused on and hoping for. So making sure that we make the apprenticeship programs throughout the state, the community college programs throughout the state, and our university system affordable, accessible to as many students as possible.
Can you tell us what you would highlight as a bill that you sponsored or co-sponsored as a legislative achievement from your last 2 years?
Thank you. Yes, in the 2020 session, both of my bills were bipartisan and supported. Again, worked with chief sponsors from both parties. The bill for responding to threats made to schools and places of worship did not advance due to cost and a few intricacies that we're going to be working out with in work groups. But we definitely need to continue having the conversation of how do we keep our schools and places of worship safe when we're not appropriately responding to when threats are made. So that was a bill that I'm glad we're having those conversations. As a member of the school safety task force for the state, I really think that we need to be ensuring that we're addressing school safety in many different ways. And so that was one way that I began to work with partners on that bill. And then I'll just highlight that the bill that I proposed for concussion protocols when a student needs to return to learn. We've done the return to play, or we did the return to play prior to my arrival in the legislature, but we never really responded to return to learn needs. And so many students are returning to the classroom with an invisible injury and the same expectations academically. And so we made sure that there's a menu of options for teachers to support students and that the students have that, that tool. Ideally, it's a support tool, and so now it'll be available across the board for students returning with concussions. So that was, again, a bipartisan bill, unanimous in both houses. It sailed through in the 2020 session in the first few days just prior to the walkout. So really just a testament to the work that was put in, the fact that we really wanted to make sure it was a bipartisan bill. I definitely appreciate and emphasize that where there's agreement, there's a path forward. So we made sure we had all the stakeholders at the table that wanted to be involved as we search for that agreement and that path forward to support students with brain injury.
Thank you. So we ask this question in all our interviews, but can you point to an example of where can you demonstrate that you are able to think independently of your caucus? Is there a key place where you disagreed with Democratic leadership on something?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the fact that you've kind of honed in on just the fact that it's, you know, the Democratic Party and the Democratic caucus and the Democratic leadership are all different essential entities. So I think I'll highlight the vote I took to oppose the increase of the transient lodging tax. That vote we were asked to take was just after the news broke about the inflated executive salaries at Travel Oregon. And I believe that we have to be good stewards of the public tax dollars. So to remove the sunset on that tax, to increase that tax at a time that the audit had shown us that that entity was not operating in good faith with taxpayer money, felt like the wrong thing to do. So I opposed that one, and it's still, we still have work to do in that regard. That one was one that failed because of the walkout. So it is definitely something that we need to continue talking about, but it's something that I oppose. I want to make sure that we are transparent, that we hold agencies accountable, and we had an opportunity to do that right then.
You mentioned climate priorities. And you know, the obviously Democrats have prioritized climate legislation. So I am wondering, but in Portland, there is a controversy around how the Oregon Department of Transportation is handling addressing climate change. So I'm wondering for you what your priorities are around transportation, preparing transportation infrastructure for climate change. And I've asked this of two other candidates for office, but do you believe that we should be expanding lanes for single occupancy vehicles given climate change?
Really excellent question. And I just am going to acknowledge that I don't know the specific controversy between Portland and ODOT. But what I will say is that—
I'm just referring to the Rose Quarter.
Okay.
You do know.
I will say that I have supported the investments in seismic retrofits and upgrades to our Boone Bridge here in Wilsonville. The I-5 bridge crossing the Willamette is in desperate need of seismic upgrades to prepare for a Cascadia event. In doing so, we also know that that particular bridge needs one more lane in order for us to stop the bottleneck that happens every day on I-5 South, and it sometimes backs up into Tualatin, into Portland, which is miles away. So that is a lane improvement that I do support, that we add that, because we know that that is a bottleneck that essentially creates an incredible lag in people sitting in their cars for extra hours. That is a specific area that I think we need to improve. Beyond that, I do know that the Wilsonville City Council, as well as regionally, supports improvements to I-205. Again, both with seismic improvements to the Abernathy Bridge, but also lane enhancements to keep the flow. Now, the question of how that interplays with climate, I think we need to have kind of a both and, that we need to make sure we're supporting electric vehicle infrastructure, that we are essentially providing other more environmentally friendly improvements to our transportation sector. I've heard discussions about bus lanes on the shoulders, things like that. So there are lots of different ways that we can approach that, but we have to acknowledge that our transportation sector is a huge contributor to the to climate change. And so the more we can do to electrify that sector, to encourage other modes of transportation, the better. However, we have to be realistic about the fact that we have a lot of people who do rely on cars, and how can we make, cleaner burning diesel engines, for example, cleaner burning engines, and remove that reliance on fossil fuels as much as possible. In Wilsonville, we have had a wonderful, we have SMART, the local bus system that has really invested in electrifying their fleet of buses, and I'd like to see more of that as well. So yeah, no easy answer there. Definitely want to make sure that we are that we're pulling together partners and talking about what the path forward is to bring down our carbon footprint as much as possible. But I do believe that when we have a known bottleneck that's impacting our communities every single day, as the Boone Bridge on I-5 South does, that we potentially could expand that particular stretch of I-5 South the first time that it narrows to 3 lanes at an on-ramp, which literally has 3 on-ramp lanes. That is a logical investment to me to keep flowing traffic going.
Mark, did you want to ask some questions? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Thank you. Courtney, good morning. Our biannual good, bad, and awful, the legislative rankings that we do, which, as you know, are not our rankings, but rather the rankings of your peers, legislative staffers, lobbyists, and some journalists. You were the lowest ranked member of the House in the Metro delegation. You were at the bottom of the barrel. Do you want to speak to that? Was that not a fair report card? Or if so, can you speak to it, please?
I'm pretty sure the report card itself acknowledges that it's not a fair report card. But I did see that, got a few elbows from colleagues. I did not run for office to schmooze with lobbyists and to make sure that they necessarily are my top priority. I definitely hope that people would look at my ability to be a critical thinker, and rating brains is just such a strange dynamic for a poll like that. So frankly, it isn't reflective of my actual work or my growth as somebody who stepped into the legislature from a teaching position just months prior to securing that role. I ran for office on my values. It does not assess values. It doesn't assess your match for your community. And I hope my community understands that I am a match for the values that they want me to be representing. I have made a concerted effort to have great relationships with my local leaders. Mayors from across the district have endorsed my race. We work together on a regular basis so that I know what the top issues for their communities are. But I do represent much more than lobbyists. So, it's not really reflective of someone's work or the breadth of their interactions to simply ask lobbyists and journalists who I may or may not have met. I'm here for my constituents, and that's what I hope that they know. And so,
Courtney, just
I'm
to
glad
repeat,
readers get a kick out of it, but when we think about it, if I was one of only 3 legislators to get a bill through in the 2020 session, I think that speaks for itself. Bipartisan work, unanimous vote, and so I hope that would be more important to an individual than the ranking.
Well, Courtney, please, you misstated the truth a little bit. The report card is not just lobbyists and journalists, it's other members of the legislature and legislative staffers. So you're of the belief that you were unfairly treated in that report card. How do you think you should have done? What do you think your rating should have been for your rookie session?
And I didn't realize that, but I again would like to come back to the fact that the work that I've done is learning and growing and representing the values of my district. So ideally, there would be a different way of evaluating if a legislator is really connected to their district's values, if the legislator is able to represent. But I'm continuing to learn and grow and continuing to work on policies that I do believe my district wants me to be representing. So I'll leave it at that. But ideally, the work speaks for itself. And beyond that, that's what I'm proud of is being there as a representative for my district.
Courtney, you make a good point, which is you said you believe you represent the values of your district. Can you talk about what those values are and how they might differ from a district in Southeast Portland, for example? I mean, what are the values of your district and how are they alike and different from the rest of the state or the rest of the metro?
Thanks. I think, I grew up in Tigard and I represent part of Tigard right now. I've known this district for a long time and I've seen it change over the years. I know that this district demands someone who's thinking about the future. We have a lot of individuals and families who move here for the quality of life, the safety that the communities offer. We have 6 phenomenal school districts in this particular House district: Westland, Wilsonville, Tigard, Tualatin, Sherwood, Hillsborough, Newburgh, and Beaverton. And so it makes sense that when so many families move to this part of the state for great educations and wonderful neighborhoods, that someone who emphasizes investing in our youth and investing in our education system would be a representative. So I've really made sure to do that. So really thrilled to be able to have been there and supported the work that went into the Student Success Act and see that across the finish line. That is something that my district values very highly. I know this district also really cares about protecting our environment as well as supporting working families. So our paid family medical leave bill is something that I'm very proud of and definitely feel was representative of what this district wants. We also have a district, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you because with all due respect, those values are shared by every Oregonian. And what you're describing does not really adequately describe how your district may be different. So let me help a little bit. We had our endorsement interview with Kurt Schrader yesterday, congressman from the area of west of the metropolitan area. He made it very clear that he would not be a good fit being a congressman from Portland, that his politics are too much in the center, and he just didn't even want to start talking about the protests in Antifa. He believes that, you know, he's one of the only 6 Democrats in Congress who voted to support the ability for someone with a concealed carry permit to take it into another state. And he said, that's who I am, and I represent the values of that district. It's why he's been reelected 5 or 6 times. That wouldn't go over well in Portland. So again, he was able to differentiate for us the values of his district in a way that wasn't filled with invest in education, working class jobs, which every Oregonian and every state of every area of the state wants. You're making a point that you are representing the values of the district. What are those values and how do they differ? How is your approach to legislating different than if you were a legislator from Northwest Portland? What does your district need that and want, and how are their values different?
So before I answer how is it different from Portland, and you acknowledged as well that all Oregonians care about that, I want to emphasize that actually previous to my representing in this district, we didn't have a legislator who was ready to invest in our schools. And that is the #1 reason why I left my classroom in 2018. I was really angry at watching what we have done to our schools for 30 years, my entire adult life since the 90s. We have invested in schools now in a way that is unprecedented in my adult life. With the disinvestments in education, I would have expected that our previous leadership in this House district would have stepped up to say, this district values education. But my predecessor was not ready to do that. And so I left the classroom. And so I'm representing teachers and students. And so I'm ready to invest in education as a top priority. So that is how I'm representing my district right now. Relative to Portland, I haven't necessarily thought about how a Democrat in this area or a member of this House district would be necessarily different from somebody in Portland. I've really tried to focus on my district. And I do know that these are not just lip service. This is truly why I am doing this work.
Okay. Thank you. 2 other quick questions. Who did you support in the primary for Secretary of State?
Shamia Fagan.
And can you share with us just 30 seconds why you believe she's a better candidate than Mark Haas?
Oh, we had phenomenal candidates running for Secretary of State. Any one of them would have been a win. I know that Shamia has put in really hard work, that she is ready for that job. I would say the same for the other candidates as well. She is, and that was a tough decision. So an interesting question on your part. Mark Haas is-
What pushed you over the edge? They're both good candidates. What pushed you over the edge to Shamia?
I asked my daughter. My daughter and I had a great conversation that night, and I was telling her about the 2 candidates and that, you know, I saw strengths in both of them. They both felt like a win for Oregon, and I knew that they were both going to work really hard on behalf of Oregonians, and I knew that she wanted to see a female lead in that role. And so we work together. She's 13 and is emerging as a political mind. And I know that it's incredibly meaningful to her to have strong female role models in a previously historically male-dominated field. But Mark is a phenomenal individual, and I have nothing but good things to say about his contributions to Oregon, and that he would have been a phenomenal Secretary of State as well. But I have the utmost confidence that Shamia Fagan will be a strong Secretary of State. She's been a consistent and vocal advocate for voting rights, for equity, and she is definitely somebody that I want to see more of in Oregon politics.
Courtney, last question, and then I'll cede the floor. Who's the largest employer in your district?
The largest employer in my district. I haven't looked at the exact numbers, but one large employer is Swire Coca-Cola. They have a bottling facility not too far from my house. We have a lot of different employers though, and the areas of this district range, as I said, from Hillsborough to Wilsonville, but Swire Coca-Cola employs many people. Now, in terms of who
Never
lives
even
in
heard
this
of it.
House district, I'm not quite sure how many people drive to the Swire Coca-Cola bottling facility, but that is a very large employer.
You have any idea how many employees they have? I've never even heard of them.
Oh, Swire Coca-Cola is a Coca-Cola bottling facility. I believe it's a few hundred. It could be up in the thousands. I just know that it's a very large facility.
Is Tektronix in your district?
No.
They're not. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for coming. Thanks, Mark. So one last question. It's our fun question of the season, and it is, what's the most awkward moment you've had on a Zoom call?
There early on, I was about to be introduced at an event, and it was right when Zoom had put this red leave button on one side, and I was used to the red being the mute button. So I went to go unmute myself, but just color coding and excitement about being able to be introduced, I accidentally pushed the leave button and left the meeting. And the other thing that's coming to mind is that, and I don't have the story to tell yet, but my husband keeps threatening to put on the inflatable T-Rex costume that we have and walk around behind me on Zoom. So maybe someday I'll have that story to tell, but I don't yet.
Is that a sign that you've been on a lot of Zoom calls and your husband wants to highlight that?
I mean, haven't we all? It's sort of like this is how we're interacting for the most part. And being home as a full-time mom, you know, this is how we're making it all work with kids doing distance learning and you know, the in-home office. So it works out. But yeah, someday I'll have the story to tell about somebody walking around behind me in a costume. Apparently that's in the works.
Well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And the endorsements will be out next Wednesday.
Thank you so much, all of you. All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. And now I'll push the red leave button.